did. They captured the attention of the leadership. And they knew that he was about change. And here's the problem. They did not want change. They liked their position. They liked their status. They liked being leaders. And they had learned to live with the Roman government because the Roman government kept them in their very comfortable position. And therefore, they didn't want what Yeshua was teaching, what he was promising. They didn't want the purpose for which he was sent into this world, and that was for the purpose of holiness. And holiness has to do with the purpose of God. And unfortunately, at that time, both the Roman leadership and the Jewish leadership, they were not living based upon the purposes of God. They didn't have a holy character, but the nation was corrupt. We talked about how John the Baptist, from a priestly family, he wasn't serving any longer in the temple because of this corruption. He had went out to the sea, by the Dead Sea, in the wilderness close to the Jordan River. There's where he was. And why? Well, many of the people who had left Jerusalem from the priesthood, they believed that the judgment of God was very near. So once again, he says, let us go into Judea again. But notice the response of the disciples. The disciples, they said unto him, Rabbi. Now, many times, this term that is translated rabbi in the Greek language is just a term, didaskalos, which means teacher. But here, that's not the case. It is literally the term rabbi, a Hebrew phrase just written into the Greek language. And we've talked about that term rabbi, and that's why I never use this in regard to myself. This term rabbi means my great one, my one who is full of abundancy. And that's who Yeshua was, and he is the only rabbi. So the disciples, they were saying to him now, like they didn't understand why he could say such a thing, because they knew, and he knew, what does it say in verse 8? That the Judeans, here again, not the Jewish people, the common folks, the normal Jewish people, but the leadership, those of the Judeans. It says, now the Judeans, they are seeking to stone you. And again, you want to go away there? And Yeshua answered, is there not 12 hours in a day? Now again, numbers are important. When we come across the number 12, what we should think? The 12 tribes of Israel. Israel should always be in our minds when the number 12 appears in the Scripture. And what Yeshua is saying is this: I'm going there, back in Judea, where there are those leaders who want to stone me, to put me to death. Why is he doing that? Because of his commitment to Israel. First and foremost, and the Scripture says this, that he was sent into this world for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, I realize that many times those who are not Jewish hear that and they're bothered by that. But understand, it's only when Israel gets right. It's only when the Jewish people are on a right spiritual foundation that God's great blessings are going to come upon who? Upon the nations of the world. And therefore, if you are wise, the greatest thing that you should be praying for is that God to move to bring Israel back to him in obedience unto spiritual truth, in order that the blessings might come, and ultimately that great blessing is the establishment of the kingdom. So Messiah is speaking here, and he says, basically, don't you know that there are 12 hours in a day? If a certain one walks in the day, he will not stumble. That is, he will not come in contact with those obstacles. He is going to recognize them. He's going to have discernment. So Messiah, he speaks once again about light, and that's so important. Why is that? Well, because so many times in the book of John, light is mentioned. He mentions it early on in chapter 1 and does so repeatedly. Why? because light is what brings God's order into this world. We see that from Genesis chapter 1. And therefore, he, being the light of the world, and that's how he called himself previously, he's going to bring God's order into your life. And that's why he says, you know, if we have God's order, if we're walking in the light, we don't need to worry and be concerned about the enemies, those who are in darkness, because they can't see clearly, but we can. So he says, are there not 12 hours in a day? If a certain one walks in the day, he will not stumble, because the light of the world, this world, he sees. And who's the light of this world? It is Messiah. But if someone should walk in the night, that is, without divine revelation, not understanding the truth of God's word, this one, he stumbles because the light is not where? In him. So we need the revelation of God in us. And who is that revelation? Here, Messiah. We've learned he's the light of the world. So unless he is in our life, unless we have a covenant relationship with him, we're going to be stumbling. Now, we need to close, and notice what it says. These things he was saying, and afterwards he says, Lazarus, our friend, he is sleeping. Now, what's important to note about this is the use of that term, sleeping. We know that ultimately Lazarus, he's going to die. But many places, both in the Old Testament and in the New, and also in Judaism, in many of the prayers, when speaking about a physical death, it speaks about sleeping. Why is that? Well, because of a hope of resurrection. So death is oftentimes spoken of as sleep because, well, when we go to sleep, we expect to get up. And therefore, when we die, we should expect the resurrection. Well, I'm out of time. Until next week when we press on in John chapter 11.